we can go ahead and get started. And I think for these, these are drop-in sessions, so people can come and go as they want, just with questions, how to use the website and to provide input. So maybe let's just go ahead and get started. Since we have just a few folks, maybe let's just do a quick round of introduction. Sean, does that work for you?
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay. Let's go ahead and do that. So I'll start. My name's Alex Dupy. I'm with MIG. We're the consultant project manager that's been working with the community, the city, and CDA 2030 over the past 18 months or so to develop a new comprehensive plan for the city. And so I'm going to turn it over to the city. Sean and Hillary, do you want to introduce yourselves?
Sure. So my name is Sean Holm. I'm with the City of Coeur d'Alene's Planning Department. I'm a senior planner and also a project manager for the Envision Coeur d'Alene project. And I'm here to help as much as possible.
Great. And I'm Hillary Anderson. I'm the community planning director and assisting with this project as well.
Great. Nicole, how about you?
Hey, I'm Nicole Kaler. I'm the executive director of CDA 2030. We're one of the partners with the city in this Envision planning project.
Great, thanks, Nicole. And since we have just a few members of the community, I'm wondering if you'd be willing to introduce yourself, and then we can talk about any specific questions you may have after we get through just a quick introduction of why we're here and how.
You can have Lindsay go next because she works with Nicole at CDA 2030. That's
okay,
so
great.
She's on the team.
Thank you. Lindsay, do you mind introducing yourself?
Hi, I'm Lindsay Beecham. I also work with CDA 2030. I'm more here just to listen in to see what people have to say today.
Great. Thank you, Lindsay. Let's see, Walter, how about you? Do you want to introduce yourself? Oh, you're on mute.
I'm Walter Burns. I'm on the Coeur d'Alene Historic Planning Commission and also on the Core Housing Committee for the city.
Great. Thank you for coming, Walter. Philip, do you mind introducing yourself?
Yep, my name is Phil Ward. I'm retired here from Florida. I spent most of my life as a planner in Florida and basically didn't have anything else to do at noon today, so I thought I'd join in here. I'm kidding. I'm very interested.
Well, that's great. I appreciate you coming. So you'll keep us on our toes with your planning experience. Madison, can you introduce yourself?
Yep, I'm Madison. I am here just to learn about what's been going on with the process. I do work for the Coeur d'Alene Press, but I also do live in Coeur d'Alene, so it's a little interesting just to know what you guys have been doing.
Oh, that's great. Thank you for coming. That's why we have these sessions. So since we have just a few people here, initially when we came in, I had muted everybody. I think, feel free to, as we step through, we'll have a brief video just talking about the kind of plan origins and its general organization. But then what I'd like to do is just open it up to questions, about the plan and specific elements. We do have an open house now on the project website, and so we can step through that as well too to make sure that there's as much opportunity as possible to provide input. But with that, Sean, I want to turn it over to you. I know you had some thoughts you wanted to start with.
Sure. So before we get into all of that, I wanted to provide a little bit of information. I'm not sure when you showed up whether or not it notified you that this meeting is being recorded, and it will be posted to the project website as soon as possible. And it would be under the resources page of Envision Coeur d'Alene or EnvisionCDA.org. We'd also like to note, like Alex said, that the virtual open house is now open through July 2nd. There are multiple ways to participate, and we can talk about those. So we have these live drop-in sessions. There are 2 of them. This is the first one. There is another one today at 5:30. So if for whatever reason you forget to ask a question, there is another opportunity, and feel free to do that. We also have the self-guided open house that is on the project website. Once again, that is EnvisionCDA.org. At the beginning, there is a link to a video that's an introductory video. That's the one that we are going to display for you today. There is a second part, which is the plan in its 4 parts. It has been broken down a little bit, so that's easier to digest. Part 1 is the plan, background, and organization. Part 2 is about Coeur d'Alene. Part 3 is policy framework, and part 4 is land use and design. So each one of those has a PDF associated with it, and also part 3 has a survey associated with it that follows that section of the website. And we do appreciate it is a very long survey. We have built it so that people can decide which portions they want to interact with. There are 6 focus areas. Right at the beginning of each focus area, it'll provide you the opportunity to either take it or skip to the next focus area. The next part is a map. It's an interactive, well, it's more of a comment map. So it's a PDF of the future land use map, and you are able to click on it and place a pin and provide comments. So we'd encourage you to do that if you are interested. And then the last portion of this is an in-person opportunity. If you want to speak to someone in person, one-on-one, feel free to contact us at planningdiv@cda.org, or you can contact us by phone at 208-769-2274. We'd like to also remind everyone that the comprehensive plan is not an ordinance. It does not change property rights or the allowances for zoning that exist already. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Alex, and he can set up that video for us.
Great, thanks, Sean. So just as I apologize, I put the wrong link in there. So if you are interested in the public open house or the virtual public open house, I'm sharing the webpage now, so you can see, as Sean mentioned, the various pieces for this. We are doing one of the drop-in sessions now, but also, there are a number of videos here that talk about each of the specific elements. The survey is a great survey. It is dense, but if you are interested in getting into those specific actions within the policy framework, that's a great way to see what's in there and kind of how things move forward within the comprehensive plan itself. So I'm going to just jump into this video here. Let me share.
Alex, I'm sorry, before you do that, can you switch back to that project website? So the other thing, there's a comment in there saying if you have comments on the parts 1, 2, or 4 to email Sean directly on that, because that's not part of the actual survey. So if you're looking through the text of the draft document and you see something that you think is missing, or you'd like to, ask a question about it, feel free to reach out directly in that way as well.
Great, and I'll drop that in the chat right now, just so we have. I think I can. Let's see. There we go. All right, so I'm going to just play this brief video. It's about 2.5, 3 minutes long, and then let's come back and let's start talking about any specific questions you may have as we step through. This will just give you a quick introduction about the plan and process itself, how we got to where we are today.
Alex?
Yes.
We do not have audio on our end. Is everybody else able to hear? Or?
No.
Okay. Thank you for that. Let me get out of this. Let's do this a different way. Thank you for letting me know. You just have a bunch of pictures and no idea what it's saying. So let's do this. Let's just do it old school. We'll go just straight to PowerPoint. So we thought we were being slick and could do the video, but all right. So let me go ahead and share this. All right, there we go. All right, so for this presentation, you saw just a little bit in the video. Can you see this okay? Great.
Yes, we can see it.
So what is going on? All right, let's just do this. So Envision Coeur d'Alene, it is a long-range planning document for the city. And for the city of Coeur d'Alene, you've done comprehensive planning many times over the past number of years. The last time you updated it was in 2007. And so, it's time to come back and actually look at the goals and policies within that document to, to refresh and to update, to make sure that for the next 20 years, the comprehensive plan, establishes that path forward based on the community input that I'll talk about in just a moment. The state of Idaho does require comprehensive plans for every city within the state itself. And so the comprehensive plan also serves as meeting those state requirements for a number of specific elements that each state or each city must address as a part of their comprehensive planning process. And so those elements have changed somewhat since 2007. And so this comprehensive plan actually brings the city up to what the state is requiring for comprehensive planning. It does incorporate implementation strategies as well too, and that is a state requirement. I think the unique thing with this process is that we are essentially melding the great work that CDA 2030 has done over the last many years to actually track and implement a number of projects and actions with that implementation planning that's required as a part of the comprehensive plan. So that partnership is actually really important for the success of this plan because it ties specific actions to the policies that we've been working on over the past 18 months or so with the community. As Sean mentioned, the plan does not change or affect zoning or property rights. Zoning is established within the city and zoning will be maintained. We do look at future vision for land use. So there is a map and a section within this comprehensive plan that does look at future land use over the next 20 years for how to consider growth over time. But it doesn't change other things like building codes or design requirements, things like that. So those are all part of your city code that are already implemented that the comprehensive plan doesn't affect. This is really about future vision, not so much how the city operates today. We started this process back in September 2019 with an in-person kickoff. We've been doing online for so long, I kind of forgot what in-person was. We had an in-person kickoff with about 80 or so folks. They met downtown. We talked about vision, land use choices, a number of elements like opportunities and constraints. And if we have a certain vision, how do we actually get there and what are the challenges to achieve that? And then we've worked that through a number of online surveys. When we started this project in September, we were planning on meeting in person for everything, and then COVID hit in March, and that changed our approach. I think in many ways, the input that we've gotten over the course of time has been actually really varied and diverse, and that's a great kind of sign, I think, for the input and kind of the activism that the city has had and the community has had to develop this plan. We had a community advisory committee that worked through vision and goals, also gave us input on future land use scenarios that we developed to actually get to where we are with the future land use map today in part 4. But we had a number of focus groups as well too. So we looked at really specific vision and action items for things like recreation and the environment, jobs and economy, health and safety, all of those specific elements that form that part 3 of the policy framework, but really started to dig into those specific actions to make sure they're updated. That gets us to today, where we have a draft plan. We're asking for input both through these sessions as well as online input through the survey, map notes, and just talking to Sean and others about what you think about the plan. So this is truly a plan developed by the community, and just to kind of show briefly the input that we've had over the last 18 months. We've had game nights where we actually played a land use planning game to actually dig into real issues that the community has been talking about for land use. We had a 30-member community advisory committee meeting that met 4 times, as well as a 65-member 6 groups of 65 members total for focus groups that met 6 times. The big elements that we have gotten a lot of information are the 4 public surveys that we've developed, not including the one that we have live now. We've had over 1,400 participants and more than 11,000 data points. So those looked at actions, those looked at land use. It's really, from an input standpoint, very diverse and very dense. And I think that's a good sign for the plan moving forward. So just going to step through some pieces to kind of show those elements. We've met with a lot of community partners to identify opportunities and issues early on. If you were able to go to the public kickoff down at the Innovation Den, this is where we actually played a game to talk about future land use within Coeur d'Alene. Some of those outcomes fed directly into scenarios that we developed for land use to think about how growth could occur in different locations over time, so that the community as well as Planning Commission and City Council could start to make choices for how to move forward. We looked at vision elements, opportunities and constraints and challenges for how we get there. And a lot of that, actually all of that, went straight into the Community Advisory Committee and focus groups to actually develop specific actions and vision elements moving forward. So we took that forward into a vision and goals survey, which looked at kind of those higher level policy questions. We asked you about land use and how growth should occur. And that brings us here to tonight, or to this afternoon, where we have the draft plan, and now we need to get some input prior to actually wrapping the draft plan up and starting to think about what adoption might look like over the next few months. So with that, I'm going to stop share. Sean, Hillary, Nicole, did I miss anything?
No, I think that was very thorough. I mean, I guess the biggest part of that is that, we really have had thousands of community members involved in the process so far. So even though just through the survey itself, it's 1,400, but we had the reach of all of the CAC and focus group members as well, the people that they represent through their organizations, and then all the other game nights and the launch event. So we really feel like we have received broad and representative input so far, but we do want to make sure we get a lot of final input on the plan before we move forward, as Alex said, with getting the document all packaged up and begin the public hearing process. So it's critical to have you participate, and you can invite your friends and family and neighbors and co-workers to join as well.
Great, thank you, Hillary. So with that, I'm going to open it up. Since we have 3 people here, we can certainly talk about any components of the comprehensive plan. We can step through the website to make sure there's clarity on how to provide input. But before I do that, I wanted to just open it up to see if there are specific questions you have that we could address as best we can as a project team. So Walter, I'll start with you. Are there specific questions or concerns you wanted to talk about?
Not off the top of my head. The only one thing I did notice is that on the map showing future land use plans going forward, there was a color code for, in the key, there was a color code for historic, but I didn't see anything historic on the map itself, any of that color code being used. Am I to assume that that will be updated once the historic planning, the historic plan that we're working on is implemented and incorporated into the comprehensive plan?
Hillary, do you want to take that?
Yes, I can take that. Thanks, Walter. So yes, all the work that our Historic Preservation Commission that you sit on has been working on with our consultant. So that's getting put into the Historic Preservation Plan that's kind of concurrent with this process. And so that identifies a lot of things related to the Garden District and some of the other neighborhoods. We also, if you look at part 3 of the document online, which is the survey, you'll see some action items. So there's one specific to creating an overlay district for historic areas. And so that's something where we would have these 2 plans, but then we would actually have to come up with something in the zoning code to allow the ability for neighborhoods to say, we want to opt in and create this designation. So we did create that place type that you mentioned on the map, so that if neighborhoods opt in the future and whatever that looks like, that would get updated at that time, and then there would be kind of an overlay boundary, or that place type would apply to that area is the thought.
I'd like to also add that it's kind of a placeholder. There is, I believe, also in part 4, as you had mentioned, some language that discusses that, but these things are happening in tandem at the same time. And so we're unable to add it to the map until we know what those polygons will look like.
Sure.
And one thing too, Walter, that you'll see as you look through that part 3 and the survey is we didn't duplicate all the recommendations from our consultants for the historic preservation plan. We didn't want to duplicate and have any inconsistency or redundancy. Basically, the historic preservation plan, once approved and adopted, that would be kind of incorporated into this document. So they'd work together. And so
Right.
one of the action items says that we would work with the Historic Preservation Commission and other community partners to identify the priority actions and then start implementing those. So we have that in addition to that one about the overlay districts.
Well, that's what I assumed was going on. I just was wanting a little bit of clarity, make sure.
Yeah, no, great question. I figured that would probably be a question of you and others.
Great. Thanks, Walter. Appreciate that. We have a new community member who just joined. Tyler, thank you for coming in today. Would you mind, we just started off, we did a quick introduction on what the plan is and how we got to where we are today. Would you mind just doing a quick introduction for the group? And if you are asking or curious about specific elements, let us know and we can cover that.
Hey, this is Tyler. Sorry for joining late. Appreciate it. I'm just interested neighborhood member. So nothing specific I'm looking for, just interested in hearing what's going on.
Great, thank you. Philip, do you have any questions at all specific?
Yeah. Yes, I do. I wanted to ask, I heard you say that the state of Idaho imposes certain elements required in the comprehensive plan. Do any of those elements set limitations, like a limitation on traffic, level of service, or a percentage of affordable housing, anything like that? Or is it strictly the element and the city then decides how to address it?
I'm going to put that to Sean and Hillary. Do you?
Okay.
I can give it a try.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
There are 17 elements that are required by the state. None of them have set limitations to traffic or amount of affordable housing or anything like that. They just said that they must be detailed and addressed in the plan. At the end of it, it says that there is nothing that the state has put in place that would limit a city to add additional elements if they so choose.
Thank you very much. Could I ask one thing further though, Alex?
Sure.
This is Coeur d'Alene 2030, which I understand, and those are the corporate limits of the city and so on. But our growth and the problems certainly are generated around us and not just within the city. Is there any way that the city can do anything to get more of a regional perspective and how it will affect Coeur d'Alene, or is that in the plan already?
Phil, I might tackle that. So this plan is just for the city of Coeur d'Alene and our area of city impact. So kind of our boundaries where we've identified that we anticipate to grow, and work through that with the county and the other communities. We are kind of separately, but it relates to this. The city is working with the other cities in Cooney County, the other major cities, and KMPO, and then we've invited a number of organizations and groups to join us in a regional housing and growth issues partnership. And so that is an area where we're tackling some of these issues as well. So there's going to be some overlap. So some things are dealing with worker housing, and kind of the affordability challenge there, preservation of open space, and looking at are there ways to set aside some land on the Rathdrum Prairie, things like that, coordinated regional planning efforts, transportation. So there is definitely some overlap, and we're doing those, I guess, in tandem as well. But we're really, for this plan, it's just going to be specific to Coeur d'Alene. There are some action items, and Nicole might want to speak to this, where it might be broader. So the action items and things oftentimes is kind of the greater Coeur d'Alene area. So we might be working with the Coeur d'Alene tribe, for example, on something else like lake management is a good example of that, where a number of partners and organizations are going to be involved in that over time. But then other ones are more specific, like if we're doing a code amendment, it's just Coeur d'Alene.
Thank you very much. Thank you both.
You're welcome.
And another part of that that Hillary mentioned was KMPO. And so, KMPO is a regional, I guess, a countywide sort of planning district that looks at the future growth as far as traffic is concerned. And so MIG worked really close with KMPO and their modeling to take our future land use map and run it through their modeling, as well as I believe MIG has their modeling as well, to look at what sort of impacts would be anticipated based upon that future land use map. And there is a traffic document that has been posted to the website. We recently got an update for the most recent version of that land use map that I have sent out for comment from our engineering, streets and engineering's department before I post it to the website. I just wanted an extra set of eyeballs on that before I posted it. But that is kind of regionally how traffic is looked at. So we looked at it from a city standpoint, but it was generated using countywide Campio data.
Yeah, it's a great question, Philip, because growth and traffic and other things don't abide by city limits necessarily. And so there's, when we looked at land use scenarios, there was a, kind of focus within the city about future growth and what could be accommodated, but also what the impacts are regionally along the system as well, both locally and regionally. Madison, I want to turn to you and just ask if you have any specific questions, and then we can step into some other presentations as well too. But if there are specific things you'd like us to address, just let us know.
I'm largely looking at, because I looked over the plan and I did notice that there's a lot of kind of social and behavioral things that you guys are looking to support in the sense of community programs and making sure people are happy and healthy, that kind of jazz, which is great. I'm really interested in, when I'm looking at your economic development planning, I did see certain things like the interest is shopping local, stuff like that. But is it wrong of me to say that there's a kind of an interest in the economic development of health and education over maybe other businesses? Because the plan, or I think it's called the plan, it's the one with the lots of grids, doesn't go much into what kind of economic development you'd like to see other than health and education.
And so just as a little bit of background, maybe Hillary and Sean, let me know if I missed anything. So as a part of the early project, we did a market study and actually a competitive market analysis for where does Coeur d'Alene kind of fit in with benchmark cities, like cities of similar size, similar job types, similar kind of mountain-ish regions, to see where Coeur d'Alene starts to stack up against other places like Fort Collins, Colorado, or other places like that, to kind of understand what are some things we should consider from an economic development standpoint to really bolster that local economy. Part of that is understanding and identifying what you have already in terms of economics and what drives the market here. And it's not just housing, it's really drives the jobs market and the innovation market. And so when we looked at that and started to think about what specific action items might be coming out of that, it really did start to focus on how do you retain the skills that you have within the area, but also what are those key factors that are needed to really build people who grow up here and then want to stay here. What are the job trainings they need, or the specific elements that they need to really kind of be able to stay here, start a business, have gainful employment. And a lot of that was around education, some around health, but also around innovation and other kind of specific elements that, when you look at who's moving here, a lot of it is tech and it's startups and it's other pieces. So how do we actually start that from the ground up within Coeur d'Alene for the local community? So part of it's health and education, but also the other part is, kind of be able to support that startup and the kind of the skunk works, if you will, that are already happening in some parts on the education side. Hillary and Sean, did I miss anything there?
I think that's great. The only thing I would suggest you do, if you have a second, Alex, is scroll up on the page that you are on, the homepage. And then at the top there, if you click on resources, and when that loads, scroll down just a hair under current documents, and then existing documents, current documents, and then economic development analysis. There is the link to that document if you'd like to review that.
And one other point on that, so Madison, you're right that there was a hearty focus on those areas for economic development, but there's also a lot more talking about kind of the partnerships and strengthening that work with the Coeur d'Alene area EDC and meeting with existing businesses, finding out what they're needing and looking at are there gaps in areas where we can kind of work with the educators locally to build the skills, and then also looking at supply chain opportunities. So figuring out what do we have here and maybe can we kind of connect the dots or attract other businesses to help support that. I think the goal really is to diversify the economy over time, and so that we make sure that, you know, as we have recessions or other challenges like that, that we're not just all focused in a couple of areas, that we have more diversity in our economic base.
And I think where we had that kickoff, you know, in September 2019 with the Innovation Den, that's a great example of, you know, some of the partnerships we're seeing in there, some of the small startups, but also the education components that start to, you know, make those connections.
Well, on the multicolored map, I'm just looking at it, is the multicolored map that you're showing what you're projecting for 2040? It's the one that says comprehensive plan future land use map.
Let's go back to that. So
sorry.
No, that's great. That's so this future land use map here.
I'm just noticing, I mean, I think there's a lot of neighborhood area, which of course I think everyone wanted to see. But there are very few areas that are designated as, you know, employment center, general industrial, and they're kind of all located around the retail center corridor, if I'm looking at that correctly.
That's correct. Let me get you a better map here so we can, actually you probably have it online. Let me open it up for everybody else to see here.
So are you more or less looking at the economic development? So you, as you kind of said, you wanted to touch on what you already have. Does that mean, you know, for example, with education, focusing more on just expanding NIC rather than maybe adding additional opportunities? Because I know that NIC is a community college, so it doesn't offer the higher education or offer opportunities that maybe other places do. And I know that the University of Idaho stays here as well, and we have career technical education opportunities. You know, it doesn't always offer the same opportunities as maybe a four-year college or traditional four-year college.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. So let me talk about the land use map just a bit, because I think there's probably other questions on this as well too. So like for places like NIC and others, those are, you know, they're already doing a lot of that work. And so those are, you know, designated as civic, which is, you know, if it's a public institution, could be, you know, it could be a city office or a library as well too, or even some parks. I think from the place types, the thing to consider with this, and the place types are the colors on that map. We really work to maintain single family neighborhoods as single family neighborhoods. And so when you'll see the different colors on this map, that's pretty much what's there now. And we really don't expect or project to change any of that. First of all, there's very little vacant land within that area. And so if it's single family, it's probably going to stay single family. The areas where we do see change is in those commercial corridors where there's a lot of land that is potentially redevelopable. And so when we look at those place types, whether it be mixed use or employment, those are the types of areas that, you know, could start to see that stronger economic development. And so that's one reason why you'll start to see those types of things along the corridors, is that that's where there's potential development opportunity. And that's also where, from a community standpoint, we heard we want services, we want jobs, we want walkability, we want different types of housing. Those were the places that people wanted to see that. The other piece for that, and I'll see if I can make this a little bit bigger. So you'll notice right in the middle here, this employment center, that's the that's Kootenai County Health, and there's a plan for that area. I'm sorry, what was that, Hillary?
Health, not Kootenai County Health.
Oh, sorry. That's an area definitely expected to see change, and you know, where you'd see, you know, different types of employment around health services.
Yeah, the health corridor.
Yeah, it could be an innovation, you know, kind of that innovation that we're seeing. So that was definitely an area that the city's already been focusing on, so that we applied that place type to the map to really support that.
And the Northern Employment Center, if you just go straight up, what is that?
So Hillary and Sean, correct me if I'm wrong, but this is mostly office park, if I remember correctly. And so there's a lot of different uses within there. And so it still kind of fit that employment center place type.
Okay.
But a lot of it's flex space, as I recall for that. Is that correct, Hillary and Sean?
Correct, yeah, and it is, I guess, I would view it as underbuilt. There's lots of opportunity there. There's a number of large scale buildings, but still lots of area, largely forested at the moment. And so we saw that as an opportunity place within the city to grow in that regard.
And then the tealer blue one, like in the middle of that,
This right
the
here?
more blue teal color.
The,
No, to the
down here.
right there. Yeah. What is that area?
So
General industrial.
Yeah. And so most of that area is already zoned, or is it developed with industrial uses? And so we just added a place type to acknowledge that. It's kind of the same with this little kind of triangular space over here, which is also generally industrial.
Is that already industrial developed, or is that space for industrial to develop?
It is largely developed there. Are still a few opportunities there, but for the most part, it has been built on.
Okay.
Industrial park, and then that other one, Madison, it's off of Kathleen, so Schreiber Way. So
Okay.
it's industrial, there's kind of a mix of uses, and then there's some industrial, but there's a lot of office and other uses within that area. And then same with on the north side, there's areas for additional existing, and then there's areas for additional industrial, and then there's existing industrial in there.
Thank you. I'm just trying to orient myself with map.
Yeah, there's also a very large gravel pit there.
Maybe since we're on this, would people mind just stepping through the land use map? We can talk about place types. This is part 4. Within that, we have that the map on the website. Let me show it again. So if you're interested in placing comments, all you have to do is you can click and then put your name in a comment. You don't have to fill all of these types or all of these fields, but if you are curious or interested in providing questions or want more answers on that, this is a good way to actually get down into the weeds on the map itself. But before I do that, would people be interested in just kind of stepping through the place types, and kind of how that land use map comes together? All right, let's do that.
Yes.
Alex, it might help too to talk about, I think you will when you get into the place types, but just in terms of the existing neighborhoods and kind of how the place type designation fits with that.
Yeah.
Or the single family and compact areas in particular.
I will. Thank you, Hillary, for that reminder.
Sure.
So let's go back here to. So one thing I want to just step back. We developed a number of land use scenarios, essentially like looking at different ways to think about growth throughout the city. And Philip, this gets to your earlier question about what happens regionally if different things happen within Coeur d'Alene. And so we looked at a number of different growth scenarios that really came out of that public engagement process that we talked about earlier. And we looked at corridors, which is kind of just more typical supporting existing development. We looked at a district, which is really kind of focusing on kind of key areas within the city to modify growth or change the growth types. And then we looked at compact, which is really kind of that core space in the central Coeur d'Alene, kind of what if you just really bumped up the growth within that area. And so all of these scenarios were really just like a series of what ifs. They informed some of the conversation about where we got to for the future land use map, but it was a way for us to analyze like how much housing could we get? What's the traffic impacts? What's the impacts to the neighborhood? And so we did these pretty early on to start to think about what those pieces might be. And then for each of those colors on the map, we have what's called place types. And so those are generalized land use categories. And you'll see, like with this place type, which is compact neighborhood, there's a number of compatible zones that go along with that. And so when I said earlier, we're not actually changing any zoning, the place type is actually a way to align zoning with what we think as a vision for future growth as it develops, what it should or could become. And so it's a way to tie that future vision to what's actually permitted on the ground. And so with that, going through, it's actually several months with Planning Commission, City Council, the public, to get to this future land use map, which has a number of place types or land use types in this area. And as Hillary mentioned, I'll step through the residential pieces. A lot of areas outside the city limits, but inside the area of city impact. It's steep, it's forested, there's a lot of limitations on how growth could occur. A lot of that area outside is single family neighborhood, which is typically what you'd see like in an R3 district. And there is some within the city that's R3. And so you'll notice as we step through these residential areas, all of what's proposed for residential is basically what's on the ground already. We're not really proposing any changes to residential areas. That's really about the corridors. And so when we look at compact and urban, that's more of a mix. And compact is still lots of single family homes, but we also start to see things like townhomes, small walk-ups, other types of elements. And this is really based on existing development pattern within these areas. So we looked at essentially every parcel within the city to make sure that, in general, these place types are aligned with what the existing development types are within these specific single family areas. So you'll see, you might see apartments here, but it doesn't mean apartments go everywhere. It just means that there are apartments already existing within these areas. Mixed use is a new or newer type of land use for the city. You do have some like with Riverstone and others. This was an area where we really focused on where do you have existing plans in place like East Sherman, Midtown, other locations that at a variety of scales could support mixed use development. And when I say mixed use, that means ground floor retail often with housing or office above that. They don't always have to be together. Sometimes you could have a single story retail building with apartments next to it or townhomes next to it, but it's really focusing on these corridor areas and providing different scales of mixed use from 3-story buildings up to something, a little bit taller where we really expect higher levels of development. And then downtown, of course, we maintain downtown and that border. So the place type downtown is essentially your downtown boundary now. And then these, and Madison, these gets to some of your questions about retail, corridor, center, and industrial. The city has a lot of general commercial in it. And, again, we're not changing the zoning, but, we did look at areas where there's existing retail commercial, strip commercial, that still is very viable, but also looked at, where specific industrial areas, either existing or future, might actually go based on what's happening in there today. And we tailored that with this, looking at both mixed use, retail corridor, industrial, with those employment centers that we just talked about. So where's the future growth coming for jobs and innovation? And then finally, just a couple others. Civic, those are your parks, those are your schools, colleges. You have a lot of them in here. And so that blue are essentially those public spaces, but it could also be city hall, library, those other pieces. There are limited instances where private public space is also identified as civic if it's a park. And so that's in there as well. And then finally, the green, plan development is a bit unique. And so we identified this with a place type. And Sean, maybe you could help explain from a plan development standpoint in Coeur d'Alene, why we broke these out separately.
Yeah, just to make sure I'm not on mute. Okay, so plan unit developments, I guess I look at them almost like their own zoning district. And so when a developer comes forward with 1.5 acres or larger, they make a request asking for some sort of concession to the rules in exchange for something else that is good for the end users of the development or sometimes even the public. So when they come forward, they can change dimensional standards, they can change, product type, things like that. So there's no real zone that applies to all planned unit developments. So we felt that it was, I guess, that the best way to bring this forward was to largely lump them together because each one is its own unique sort of thing. Some of them have commercial elements associated with them. Some of them are residential. Some of them are privately owned parks that allow the public to be on them. And so they didn't fit neatly into any of the other categories. And since they were all PUDs, we decided that that was probably the best way to display them on the land use map.
So those are, thank you, Sean. So that's the land use map in general, kind of a quick overview. Are there any questions with that at all? I know there's a lot of colors. It's the whole city, so there's a lot of density and development that's even a lot of kind of information in this map. Any questions at all about that, or concerns or comments?
Alex, I think one thing that we could clarify too is we did when you went through the mixed use place type, one of the things we studied with the Planning Commission's assistance based on a lot of the public engagement was, are there strip centers or other large format, big box type retail where there might be an opportunity for some mixed use in the future? And so there are a few areas that we did place that mixed use place type on the map, just for the future, recognizing that that might be an appropriate location to add maybe some residential or kind of a mix of uses to intensify an area that might just look like there's a huge sea of parking right now that's being underutilized. So we did take advantage of that with the future land use map as well, to look at what are potential opportunities for mixed use as well as for future job opportunities.
Great, thanks, Hillary. That's a great point. Yeah, and I think these focus areas are along those corridors. But really the goal for this was really to preserve existing neighborhoods to the greatest degree practical and focus on where there is change already happening, just to kind of help provide some vision for that moving forward.
So also getting back to Madison's question too about higher education and future growth and things of that nature. So there is, and you had mentioned it, Madison, about the education corridor. And so when we worked on that, that is a good portion of NIC is also a planned unit development. It was looked at as large ownership of properties that are amalgamated together to be that specific use. And we have not been approached by any education institute or even the public school district to say, hey, here's where we're going, or here's what we're doing. We took a look at some of the ownerships of property, and it didn't seem that we could identify larger areas that would fit the bill for that. So I guess it's kind of a chicken and egg conundrum. The one that we did identify, if you go to the civic map just above that, let's see here where that is. Okay, just on the, if you scroll to the left there, Alex, where the Forest Service property is, well, that used to be owned by the school district, and it's since been purchased by a church. And so we're nervous sometimes on second guessing maybe what the school district is doing. And so we refer to their master plans and reference them in the plan, because if we start duplicating data and putting it in our plan, then we're constantly updating our plan if they change their master plan. And so if they bring us forward a very specific request in a specific location, we're more than happy to provide that in our plan.
And you'll see too, there's action items about working together to coordinate on future opportunities for the school district for locating school sites. And then there's also some action items with the North Idaho higher education listed in there. And one of them is even identifying post-secondary education collaborations with regional partners and institutions. So while we haven't said, yeah, we need a 4-year university here, but there are opportunities to collaborate and to grow, I think, what's already here in Coeur d'Alene.
And Hillary, just for everybody else, so the survey Hillary is talking about is, we want your input on the policy framework and priority action items. So just click here to take the survey, and it'll take you straight to a Survey Monkey. And you can step through each one, or you can look through the specific ones that you want to take a look at, because there are 6 key principles that we've been focusing on. So I think that is the plan in a nutshell. Are there any questions or comments? Anything we can help? We really encourage you to take the survey and provide input on the land use map, or contact Sean or others for questions or comments. Is there anything else we can answer for you, or just talk about here while we have you for a few more minutes?
Yeah, while we're here, in looking at the land use map, I'm seeing that it's largely, it consists largely of what exists today. I see, and I wonder where it's allowing for growth. I can see it in the mixed use corridors as being something that is changing, but are we really allowing for the growth that we expect? So
I think the big changes within this area, partly it's getting on the map the health corridor. That is an area that you will certainly see change over time. I think the other areas, I think you're absolutely right, focusing on these areas. One thing we looked at is where are areas that are potentially redevelopable throughout the city, and that's when you start to see changes. And Hillary, you mentioned this, is really large parcels that are underused, vacant malls or malls with, or even development with really large parking lots with small buildings. So we focused on looking at what that future land use vision would be for those areas. What we found with the kind of the redevelopment study is that residential areas, sure, a parcel or two will pop up here or there, but when we look at future growth, the change is really not going to be in those residential areas, just because there isn't the opportunity to do that. You're really going to see it, I think, in some of those core areas like East Sherman, for example, or along in these mixed use areas where there are larger parcels that are underdeveloped. So that's kind of what we had focused on. There's a vacant parcel here or there in the residential areas. Those will probably infill with other single family homes. But when you look at kind of the broader growth, I think it's in these corridors that you're going to see it. John, Hillary, is that fair?
Yeah, it is. It's also important to note that the underlying zoning map that isn't part of the comprehensive plan has zoning associated with it, and what actually is built upon it may not rise to the level of the highest and best use too. So there are plenty of opportunities in areas where there may be single family homes now, but it's a zoned R17, and so the zoning anticipates that over time you may see some of those things shift when you do infill development or redevelopment, and that things may change. And so you can also see on the single family map is largely the external side of things. There's Fort Grounds is there, and Sanders Beach and some things like that. Definitely the hillsides where some is very, very difficult to build upon. But the next map, if you go to slide 13, thanks, Alex. So that also shows, where the R12s and R8s and R17s are that can accept some additional density. And that is a discussion that will be had after the comprehensive plan is passed under core housing, as how do we look at these areas where on one hand we're protecting neighborhoods, but on the other hand we're also allowing for growth where it makes sense. And those sometimes can be difficult conversations, but the future of our community demands it. So this is kind of how we envision that growth happening.
Yeah, and Sean, just to reiterate that your existing zoning actually allows for additional growth in some area today. And so those R17s, those could develop under existing zoning, if they're single family. So that is a possibility, not necessarily associated with this map, but we do acknowledge kind of what that zoning is within these place types.
Thank you.
Phil, you had a question.
Alex, can I make a comment?
Yeah.
Let me preface this by most of my life I was involved in planning and zoning, but it was for private developers. So oftentimes a comprehensive plan was an obstacle, not a benefit. When I read the social media information on growth, it's just so such a lack of understanding. And I don't really understand why, because generally comprehensive plans prepared by professionals are really good. They recognize where growth can go and recognize that it's going to come. Mm-hmm. And when you have a charrette, now all these people get together, they come up with their suggestions, and generally they do a pretty good job too. But individually, the comments people make, it's like they have no comprehension of zoning or planning, which probably in most every state is the most public function available between public meetings, public notices, and so on. And I don't know how that word really gets out to the public better, but I just feel like, this comprehensive plan, the CD 2030, it considers everything the way it should. And it's an excellent plan. That's all I can say.
Well, we appreciate that. And yeah, thank you. There's definitely stuff out on social media right now about growth. I mean, Coeur d'Alene is growing quickly, and that's something we've heard throughout this process. So hopefully we've been able to balance, the best we can those conversations, moving forward. But yeah, point well taken on kind of the discussion about growth in general. So we're just at 1 o'clock. I want to respect everybody's time. Anything else? This has been super helpful, and I really appreciate the input and the questions that we've had. This helps us, as we develop the final draft to help refine that. Any other questions for the team before we close it out?
This is Tyler Gabriel. I have one quick question.
Sure.
And a comment. The comment first, this appears, although I haven't read through everything, to be a very comprehensive plan, and I'm looking forward to reading more about it. I also recognize it's a significant effort, and that you can't do this all the time. So how often are we going to update this, and what's the mechanism? 2 years ago, we weren't expecting the kind of growth we're seeing today. What's the timeline for the next update on this?
Turn that to Sean and Hillary.
Yeah, so generally, the state asks us to look at our comprehensive plan every 7 to 10 years. In the case of our current plan, it's from 2007 and it goes to 2027. And at that time, our plan has worked well for us, and while it feels like we're having unprecedented growth everywhere, including specifically in the city of Coeur d'Alene, our numbers are actually consistent with what has been projected over time. We're still at close to 3% annually, which is what we've projected. Now, that's not necessarily true of the whole region. The whole region is growing a little bit higher pace, but that is expected. It normalizes over time. So we've been working with our partners at CUNY Metropolitan Planning Organization, KMPO, on growth projections, and all the other cities in the county work together. Sean had mentioned that maybe before you tuned in, just kind of on the work we do regionally on planning and projections and how that affects transportation. But definitely that's something, within 7 years, or even if something happens sooner where we're like, wow, we are way off base, we need to look at this plan a little bit, earlier than the 7 to 10 year mark. But I think we've really set this up to guide us for at least the next 10 years in a very sustainable manner in terms of growth, and kind of taking the next step and looking at the future land use map that we don't currently have to help with the decision making for the elected and appointed officials, and really addressing historic neighborhoods, really focusing a lot more on economic development, and then working to make sure we've kind of addressed all those the 6 focus areas that CDA 2030 and other partners help us, to make sure that we're meeting all of our community priorities.
Yeah, I would also say that, we had conversations about this specifically. What we might be seeing right now at the very moment is a lot of growth, but people tend to forget, the 2008 through 14 kind of era where there was people moving away to go work in Wilmington, and because the jobs dried up, and economic hardships were happening quite often and within our region. And so we try to I guess take a step back. That's what this is kind of a 30,000 foot view of what Coeur d'Alene is going to be over the next 20 years, and say, like we're like Hillary had mentioned, growing at a 3% rate and trying to smooth out the highs and the lows. Because if you were to just say, okay, well, we're growing way too fast and we got to get rid of growth, and you structure your plan towards that, and in a few years the economy goes south, the conversation quickly moves from, well, how do we get to that? We're growing too fast, to how do we get that growth to happen again? Where did it go? And so I guess this is kind of in moderation, looking at all the bumps and valleys kind of smoothed out over the next 20 years, what we expect and how we would like Coeur d'Alene to grow.
Nicole, you had a comment.
Yeah, so I wanted to speak specifically to the action plan. That is an aspect that we've had with CDA 2030 since 2014. We started the plan in 2013, but the first plan was produced then. We annually revise that document by reaching out to the lead partners, which are the partners that are championing each action, and make revisions to ensure that the actions are relevant and actionable, as well as update the progress on the timeline. So we're looking at those constantly. It is the portion of that plan inside of the overall comprehensive plan is a living document. And then we typically have an overhaul of the action plan, a major overhaul every 5 years. So while the comprehensive plan as a whole document is looked at every 7 to 10 years, the action plan is actually revised annually.
Thanks, Nicole. I was going to ask you to speak to that because I think it's really important that the public knows that the implementation plan is a living document, and that is the survey on here. Those are the priority action items that we want the public to help us to identify so we can figure out what should be tackled first. Thank you.
So with that, take the survey. You'll find out all about the action plan and what's in there. We want your input on that. Just as a reminder, on the project website, there are a number of videos which we didn't step through, but you could talk more specifically about land use or how the plan's laid out. There's also videos within that as well too, if you're interested. And then, again, dig into the land use map if you want. It's open. You can provide as many comments as you want, and those comments are tracked and they come right back to us so that we can have those as we wrap this piece up. So with that, unless there's any questions, I'm going to close this out.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you, everybody.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, appreciate it. Thank you so much, everybody. And yeah, keep in touch. We'll be back in the fall, later in the summer with the draft plan itself. So thank you.
And then we'll have a second one of these today. So if you know anyone that's interested or has some burning questions, please encourage them to attend the 5:30 session.
Right. If you have nothing to do from 5:30 to 6:30, come on back.
Back for more. Round 2.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
It's a good session. Thank you.